Welcome back to the kitchen today. We are not canning, we are doing a Q&A session. I'm really looking forward to this. It's the first one I've done. I put out a call for questions and you came back with a bunch of different questions on several topics. So today I am going to break it up into some loose categories. I have some canning and some general preservation questions. I have some keto related and personal questions, some organization questions, and then finally some questions about future plans and where the channel is going. So grab a cup of coffee or a glass of iced tea and let's sit and have a chat. All right, we'll start with this one. I had several folks ask about my background in preserving food, how and why I got started. And honestly, it just kind of feels like it kind of seamlessly flowed into my life. When I was a kid, my stepmother was always pickling something. You would open the pantry and there were bread and butter pickles and dill pickles and dilly beans and zucchini relish and zucchini pickles and all kinds of wonderful things. And then we also had raspberries and blackberries in the backyard, so there were jams and preserves. I want to say she also made grape jelly. I don't know, there was always this wonderful collection of things that she had made. And then we had an outbuilding on the property, and that's where she was fermenting wine and vinegars. And I could kind of kick myself for not taking more of an interest in these things when I was a kid. But they were just always normal. Open the pantry and there's food, and some of it she had made and some of it she'd bought at the grocery store. And there were always dried herbs, tacked to the shelves in the pantry. So it just, I don't know, it was just kind of part of life. And then when I grew up and left home, honestly, I didn't have time to even think about all of this stuff. And I'd go to the grocery store and it seemed that, Smucker's had done a whole lot of the work that she used to do. And, there were pickles of all different varieties in the grocery store. And, I could buy wine, I could buy vinegar. So honestly, I thought, well, gosh, things have come a long way. So I used the grocery store for those things for a very long time. And then as my kids grew up a little bit, when they were no longer babies, I was in a career that gave me a little more flexibility in time that I had in the kitchen. And so I did start, and I was doing pickles and jams and jellies and that kind of stuff. I didn't get into fermentation until just a few years ago. But that's really where I started. And then at some point in the early 2000s, I stumbled across the ball books because I'd just been using my stepmother's old recipes, which I call canning light, right? They didn't necessarily follow any of the things that we use as standards today, but you know what? They worked out just fine. So I did things the way she had done them. And then at some point, I came across one of the ball books. And I guess it was an old version of the Ball Blue Book. And so that started to get me. I was reading recipes. I love cookbooks. And so I was reading recipes. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, look how many things I could actually make myself. And so I started with water bath recipes that were, a little more complicated than just pickles or jams or jellies. And I would make all of these beautiful things that I would be so impressed with myself that I didn't want to open them and eat them because they just looked so pretty on the shelf. So anyway, that was kind of how I, caught the bug, right, of preserving food myself. Still, it was not so much food preservation as it was creating something or cooking or whatever. So from there, things just, I don't know, they just kind of took off, evolved from there. Pressure canning came later. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And I started with full meals. I wanted to have some full meals. I had a teenage son who could eat like, I don't know, like there was no tomorrow. He used to say he had 4 stomachs. And it was very hard to fill those stomachs up. So I was very interested in making meals in jars for him so that, before dinner, after dinner, whatever, when he was hungry, because he was always hungry, he would have something good and nutritious that I had made for him to eat rather than ordering a pizza or eating a bag of Doritos or, whatever other kind of junk food. So I started doing more and more really to make sure I was feeding my family when I didn't want to be in the kitchen all the time, because I had a very demanding career at the time, and to spend the time I needed in the kitchen to constantly be making food when they needed food was just, it was more than I could take. So it really just evolved from there, and once the kids were gone, I was still doing this, and I suddenly realized, oh, this is my hobby. This is my hobby for retirement. And I don't know, you do something you love and you hope that in retirement you're going to do something that you love. And you also hope in retirement that you're going to do something to add value somehow, some way to someone. And so that's kind of how I got to the point where I am. I hope that I am adding value by teaching other folks how to can and why you should be canning or preserving food in any of the other ways that we're doing these days. That's really how my food preservation career developed. Dehydrating has, I don't know, it's come in somewhere along the line. I've always kind of dried herbs, but I dried them by hanging. And then I don't remember when I got a dehydrator, maybe, I don't know, 2010-ish, let's say. And I started doing tomatoes and beef jerky and other vegetables and dried fruits and fruit leathers and all those kind of fun things. So I really enjoyed that. And then fermenting, that didn't start until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and that started with kombucha. And that was because I loved kombucha, but the price of kombucha at the grocery store was just crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy, I thought. So I knew I could do it for a lot cheaper. And so that was how I started in fermentation. And then freeze drying, just a year ago, maybe a year ago this month is when I got my freeze dryer. And I still feel like I am learning that, both in what types of things I want to freeze dry and in how I want to use those things that I freeze dry. So that's been a fun journey. I love learning and growing, and that's where I am. From that, let's go into a controversial one. This one, I'm just gonna read this question to you. And I had a couple of questions along these lines. So this one says, you mentioned canned bacon. What convinced you that canning bacon was a good idea? Actually, what do you consider going against the grain? I would love to do the same, but they have put me over the top of fear of not branching out away from the rules firmly planted in my psyche. Don't tell the canning police I'm considering leaving the path. I had several questions about this, and how do you know that one recipe is good to can and another recipe is not? And a lot of folks seem to think that there are actual rules, that recipes are either approved or they're disapproved, right? And that's not actually the case. The government hasn't had any funding for any kind of testing in the food preservation since the 1950s. So, that's like 75 years ago. So whatever they had tested up until then was a couple generations back in terms of how we eat and how our tastes have evolved over time. And so a lot of what they were testing back at the time is not necessarily the way that many of us want to eat now. It doesn't mean that new recipes are not acceptable because they haven't been tested by the government. Nothing's been tested by the government in a very, very long time, and it's not going to be anytime soon. What we do have is not rules, we have some guidelines that they figured out over those 20 years or whatever of testing that they did. And so we try to operate within those guidelines. However, we also try to add some common sense there, because to me, in my kitchen, not all of those guidelines make total sense. So that is where you have to decide on your own what you are comfortable canning and what you're not comfortable canning. Nobody's going to come arrest you if you turn your jar of jam upside down and consider that to be canning, right? I mean, that's how it was done for generations. So it makes me a little crazy when people get yelled at, in Facebook groups for not doing something that's an approved recipe. I don't know where people think the new canning cookbooks come from. Like take, let's see, I'm right here sitting on top of, like, Pomona's pectin recipes. The USDA is not testing their recipes. Angie and her book here, the USDA is not testing her recipes, but we use, the guidelines, right? In all of this kind of stuff, you need your pH to be below 4.6. The rest is simply technique. So water bath canning, that's pretty straightforward. In a cookbook like this, which is all pressure canning, Angie lays out the guidelines that she follows. And then if you read those guidelines, most people skip through all of that beginning part and go straight to the recipes, right? And then they want to question, well, is it safe? We'll go back and look at the guidelines that she follows. She lays them out very clearly. So what we have now from the government is a bunch of very old tested recipes. And then we have everything else, which isn't a bad recipe. It isn't unsafe to can necessarily. It's just something that has not been tested because nothing's been tested for 75 years or whatever the time period is, for a very long time. So we do have some general guidelines. Now I will say that to me, not all of those guidelines make sense. And I choose to, how do I put this? I choose to do things that make sense to me, and if I'm doing something that is not an approved guideline, I do spell that out to you in videos, because that is your decision to make whether or not you're going to do that. All right, so let's go back to the bacon question. I made a comment in one of my early videos that I would never can bacon. That just sounded crazy to me. That was not something I was going to do. That was nuts. And then, what did I do? Some period of time later, I canned bacon, and I can a lot of bacon. I really enjoy the canned bacon. So we go back to my original statement, which I have now learned to never say never on camera. What I was talking about was that it sounded gross to me, right? I mean, it wasn't so much that the canning was unsafe. It just sounded awful. I like a good crispy bacon, and all I could imagine coming out of this jar was floppy, limp, yucky looking bacon. So to me, it was like a why on earth, would I take something that I can produce a great product from and turn it into something that would not be a great product? Well, then of course I saw a bunch of people doing it, and it came out, and they of course stuck it in an air fryer or something, which I wasn't using my air fryer very much at the time, so that didn't occur to me. And it was coming out as crispy bacon, and they liked it. And I thought, well, you know what, if I can get a good product, maybe that's okay. Now, I was never concerned about the safety of it. There are some guidelines that say not to can cured meats because it is so dense that the temperature on the inside may not get up to the proper temperature to kill botulism. However, the same government entities acknowledge that the curing process kills botulism. So, I don't know, that didn't make sense. So I never had an issue with the safety of it. I was more concerned about what the end product was going to be. And when I saw that other people thought the end product was good, and it looked good on screen, right? I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a try, and I did. And it took me a little while to figure out, how long it needed to go in the air fryer kind of thing. But it is, in fact, we had bacon sandwiches last night for dinner from canned bacon, and we really enjoy that. I love having that on the shelf. And here's the other thing people have said is, you lose all the bacon grease. Well, no, you don't. You get a whole bunch of bacon grease at one time, and I fill a couple of canning jars, and I keep, one in the fridge, and I always have a backup in the freezer. As a Southern girl, I'm not going to do without my bacon grease. So I do take care of that as well. So I don't know. That's my thought on canning bacon. Do it or don't do it. It is entirely up to you. Other things that have been cured, ham. Ham is one of those things where there are approved recipes that include ham, like in ham and vegetable soups and bean soup kind of things. You can find approved recipes that involve ham, but then we're instructed not to can ham, and I don't know. It makes no sense to me. So I am personally okay with canning cured meats in my kitchen. So that is something you need to decide kind of where your comfort level is in that. So then this leads into another question. People ask, well, why can't I can my, version of beef stew or my version of marinara sauce or whatever it is, right? And, you can make one up. Well, again, when I'm creating a recipe for canning, I am paying attention to the guidelines that make sense. And I'm also paying attention to the end product that I'm going to get, right? So like let's say Brunswick stew. That's one of my favorite things to can. It was one of the initial meals in jars I did because it's a long time favorite family recipe of mine that I do. And there are, from the rule side, everybody wants to say it's, you can't can Brunswick stew, when what the government actually says is there are so many different recipes for Brunswick stew that we did not test any. Therefore, we don't have an approved recipe to give you. And if you read it, that is what it says. So to me, that does not say canning Brunswick stew is unsafe. It means that they had too many different recipes, and there are a bajillion different recipes for Brunswick stew. But with mine, everything in it can be canned, has its own canning instructions that are tested and approved. But there's a slightly different process because of the potatoes. And so there are just different ways to treat things in a recipe. I don't necessarily cook up an entire batch of Brunswick stew to fully cooked and then can it, because the tomatoes would just be this starchy, mushy, icky by the time you got to it. So part of what I do in putting together a recipe for canning is not just making sure that everything is going to can properly, but that it's going to taste like it was worth your time. It's going to be something you want to eat. It is not going to do the original recipe or what you had in mind a disservice. So that's kind of how I work on my recipes, and why some recipes it may not be that they can't be canned, but you just need to make sure you're thinking through all the different pieces of it and how that is going to work out. So that's my thought. That's my thought there. I don't do, here I am saying never, right? But there are other people, and not so much on this channel, but I see it in Facebook groups. They're like, well, if SpaghettiOs can can spaghetti, or Chef Boyardee can can ravioli, or I don't know, whatever it may be, we can do it too. And my first question is, why would you want to? Why would you think about the end result? If you're going to go to all the time and effort, do you really want to put something on your shelf that is no I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you love Chef Boyardee or SpaghettiOs or, Campbell's chicken noodle soup or something. To me, that's not what I want my pasta to end up like. If I'm going to put something on the shelf to serve my family, I want it to be of a level that suits me, that feels like it's homemade, not feels like it came out of a Campbell's can. So I don't know. To me, I just have no interest in pursuing that kind of thing. Safe, not safe. I don't know. It just doesn't appeal to me at all. So that's my thought on that. You do whatever suits you in your kitchen. That is your decision to make. All right, let's move on to some specific canning questions I get. This one says, I would like to know what causes siphoning and how to prevent it. So generally speaking, well, let me tell you what siphoning is. Siphoning is when liquid is lost from a jar. So you put a jar in and it looks like it's full, and you come to take it out of the canner, and the liquid has shrunk down to halfway, even though maybe some of the solids in the jar are still above the liquid down. So that's siphoning, liquid loss. It's not generally a safety issue unless you've lost, more than half of the jar's worth of liquid. In that case, I would just stick it in the fridge and eat that one first, or, just eat it within the first week or so. But it is kind of frustrating because you want your jars to look pretty on the shelf as well, and you want them to be good for long-term storage. So generally speaking, siphoning is a result of a very rapid temperature change. And more often than not, that comes at the end of processing, when we get too eager to see the results or to just be finished with the process, right? To get everything out of the canner and be done so we can move on to whatever else it is. And so it goes from a very high temperature to room temperature, and it's just a shock to the system, and then water or liquid, whatever the liquid is in there, can burst out. So that's one thing, is to really take your time, let it come down in pressure if you're pressure canning, take the lid off if you're water bath canning, and let the temperature of the water start to cool so that it's not such a shock when you take those jars out of the canner. And then in pressure canning, I like to not only let it come down to zero pressure, but then continue to let it sit for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then I take the lid off, and then I give that a couple of minutes to kind of normalize to room pressure and start to affect the temperature a little bit. And then take your jars out and put them on a towel or something so that they're not going straight from the hot canner to a cold, granite countertop kind of thing. So that's one instance, and that's generally the primary instance that we have siphoning. The next thing is that maybe we're not watching the headspace as closely as we should be. Particularly if we have a thicker sauce in there, those can need a little more room to bubble up, because we're in pressure canning, we're going to be cooking these things at 240 plus degrees, and they are going to need some room to bubble. And if we have cheated, given a really chintzy headspace, it's not going to have room to do that, and it is going to push hard on the lid, and you may have some siphoning from that. So the next thing has to do with when we're putting on the lid and the ring. We put the lid on, we've cleaned the rim, and making sure that there's nothing stuck on there, there's nothing sticky, there's no little piece of food or herb seasoning, anything like that on there, that there are no cracks in the rim. We put the lid on, we know that the lid is good, we've checked the seal, put that on, and then we put on the ring, and we do it to fingertip tight. And this is sometimes kind of a hard concept to grasp when you're starting. What exactly is fingertip tight? And so you put it in, and sometimes when you pull out a jar, sometimes the rings are just kind of wobbling around on there. They've gotten really loose because they've been boiling in a pot, whether it's a water bath canner or a pressure canner. I keep pointing over here because that's where I usually put my electric canner, on that corner of the island. But so that jostling around can loosen up that lid a bit. So while we don't want a very tight lid, we do want a lid that is going to at least stay reasonably on the jar. So sometimes we have not put that jar on. Sometimes it just bounces around and it loosens up, and it just is what happens. So siphoning happens to all of us. You know, I don't know that I could ever have a year without some sort of siphoning incident. So just expect it to happen, and know that the way to deal with it is just to stick that jar in the fridge if it's gone down far enough, and just plan to eat it that week. And that's your meal prep. You've already prepared dinner for one night that week. So that's siphoning. I had a couple of things that were very specific to canners. One person asked about a Presto stovetop canner, and they were having a hard time seeing the steam coming out from that. I don't know what to tell you about that, except to hold up some. I don't have a black sheet of paper or a black book or anything here, but I would just hold up something behind it so that you can see the steam a little bit better. It is happening. Once your canner fills up with steam, it is going to start coming out the little hole, as long as that little hole is actually clear and not clogged up. So I would say just do whatever it is you need to do. I have some black towels. That may be what I would hold behind it, and that should make it easier for you to see how much steam is really coming out of the little hole in the Presto canner. The other thing was about, or the other canner-specific question was about the All-American. And this person has never been able to get it to create pressure, and was asking, show me how to do the oil on the ring so I can get it to hold pressure. And I don't oil my All-American canner. I have done it once, because the very first time, in fact, when I used that canner, I couldn't get it open. At the end, I could not get the darn thing open. It was not releasing for anything in the world, and I'm panicking. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've just spent a fortune on this canner, and now the lid is stuck and my food's in there, and how am I going to explain this? So anyway, did finally, once it cooled off, the lid came off easily. But I did oil it after that one time, and I've never since had any kind of an issue. I didn't have an issue ever with it holding pressure, but I never had an issue getting it off. So I have oiled my lid one time and never had to do it again. So I don't think that that is going to be the issue with this person who is not achieving pressure with an All-American canner. So with the All-American canner, I honestly, I cannot think of anything other than perhaps a defect in the canner that is causing it not to achieve pressure. There's a little arrow. You line up your arrows. It's one on the canner and one on the lid, and you line up those arrows, and then you twist it. And then if you close all those locks and you get them screwed on as tightly as you can, I just don't see how it cannot build up pressure. That even starts happening before you put the toggle weight on. So all I can think is that may be a defect in that particular canner. I don't know. I would love to know the answer to that when you figure it out. All right, a few more specific preservation questions. I read somewhere not to use chlorinated water in the food when canning. Is this true, and why? I have never heard that. Up until maybe 2015, I was using straight tap water in everything that I cooked or canned, just city water. So it was definitely chlorinated, and heaven only knows what else is in city water. All of that is what I was using at that point, 2015, 17, I don't know, somewhere in there. I did start filtering my water at the kitchen sink through an RO system, and now we have a whole house water filtration system. So while I don't use chlorinated water now, I certainly did for, I don't know, decades, and had no problem with it. So I have not heard that. If you have a very strong smell to your chlorinated water, maybe you want to let it sit out for a little bit before you can it, because that will evaporate off. So that's what I have for you there. Okay, the next one says, I've been canning green beans and tomato juice for 45 years. I've just recently ventured out into canning meat and sauces, etc., and have been very pleased with my results, except hamburger meat. It has a bit of a smell that I find displeasing. Are you familiar with this, or am I doing something wrong? And we talked back and forth a little bit about how she was canning her hamburger meat, and it sounds absolutely fine. So I don't, it smells, hamburger meat, everything, when you open a jar, you're going to smell whatever the food is, and it doesn't smell unpleasant to me. It doesn't smell off-putting at all, but I have heard other folks say that about canned meat of all different varieties. So I think it's just a personal sensitivity thing and may take some getting used to. Let me know if you guys have had other experiences with that, but the way she's doing it is just fine. And it's not like it's, sitting on the shelf for 15 years and then she's opening up and it doesn't smell good. She cans it and then she tries it, and she's not necessarily thrilled with the smell. And, I don't, I don't think she's doing anything wrong. I think it's just either something she decides is not going to be for her, or just something she needs to adjust to. I don't even smell it anymore. Frankly, it's just, I open the can of hamburger meat and toss it in the pan and do whatever I'm going to do with it. So that's my thought there. You're just fine. You just need to decide if it's something you want to continue doing or not. I had one person ask if I had ever used lard to preserve meats. And my answer is no, I have never done that. I did do a bit of Googling just to see to what extent this was a thing. And it is a thing. It's an older preservation method. But what I generally found was that you still needed to put it in the refrigerator, but it could keep your meat fresh for up to a year. So this is something that I have no experience with this. So I would just say, make sure you do your own research and come to some answers and methods that make you feel very comfortable with it. I unfortunately cannot add any value for you there. Let me see. This next question asks, can quarter pint jars be used in a Presto electric pressure canner? The answer is yes, they can. If you're going to put them on the bottom row, you can stack those in in the Presto electric pressure canner. If you're going to put them on the bottom low, they will be below the water line, because with the Presto Electric, you fill to the water line that they have marked inside the tub there. So the jars will be submerged in water, and you want to think, well, that can't be right, because are they going to be water bath can, or are they going to be pressure can? No, they're still going to be pressure can, because the pressure canner is still going to bring it up to the temperature of pressure canning. It's not going to stop at the 212 that water bath canning does. So that is just fine. Now, if you find that your jars are floating because maybe they're not heavy enough in those tiny little jars, you will need some sort of a regular canning grate or rack to put in there, and then perhaps put either another layer of jars, filled jars in there, or use some jars that just have water in them, with or without a lid, just to weight it down, because you don't want them floating all around and clinging around and tipping over and that kind of stuff. You do want them to sit firmly there on the bottom rack in the canner. All right, I have one more specific canning question. Have you ever canned homemade pumpkin puree? And my answer is no, I haven't. Not because I don't think it's doable, but simply because I don't have the room to grow pumpkins. So I have not done it. However, I have seen Ruth Ann Zimmerman do it, and the way she does it, and that is exactly how I would do it. I would follow Ruth Ann Zimmerman. I will try to find that video. It's not a video, it's not a very old video, so I'll try to find that link and put it down below. Talk about a common sense canner. I think Ruth Ann is terrific. So I will put the link to that, because that is exactly how I would do it if I had the opportunity to make and can my own pumpkin puree. All right, let's see. I think there is one more specific. Nope, there is not. Okay, I think that does it for the specific canning questions. a couple of folks asked about my spices. You can see over my shoulder here, I have these big spice jars that I love. Everybody always asks about those. I will put those, I'll put a link to those down below. I bought them from Amazon. I think they're considered to be like juice jars or something like that. But anyway, I love these jars. And so someone was asking where to get them, so I'll put that link down below. Somebody else was asking, can I keep my herbs and spices fresh in such big jars, right? So can I get through that quantity, and what are my thoughts on how long herbs and spices last? I'm as guilty as anybody of letting my herbs and spices go too long sometimes. However, you'll notice that I only have a few here. Well, in my pantry, I have a ton. And I do have some smaller jars. These are things that I don't use very often, and I will buy them in small jars, right? Like celery seed or something. I don't use celery seed very often, so I buy that in a small jar rather than keep a big jar like this. These are the spices and herbs that I use most often, and I go through very quickly. And when I'm creating recipes for you or whatever, I can go through a lot. I can go through almost an entire one of these jars of garam masala or, I don't know, all kinds of different things when I'm working on a recipe. So I do manage to go through all of these pretty rapidly. Herbs, ideally I'd get through those within 6 months, but generally speaking, it's about a year for me that they can retain their freshness, and I can open a jar and I know without even looking at it that it is oregano or it is basil or it is thyme or whatever. The spices, so the things that are ground, those, they're most potent, going to be most potent in the first 6 months. And I like to use them in the first 6 months, particularly the ones that are really there for a big impact. Like something like coriander. Coriander never really makes a big impact for me, so I don't necessarily worry about my coriander being older. But I want my cumin to be pretty darn fresh because I want the impact of cumin. I want my garam masala pretty fresh because I want the impact of garam masala. So, if I open a jar and, you couldn't blindfold me and ask me what it is, then I know that it's time to replace my spices and herbs. So I do the best I can. Most of my spices and herbs I get most of my herbs these days I grow and freeze dry and refill on my own. But most of the spices I'll get from the international market in Atlanta whenever I go back to visit. Now, I have gotten some from Azure and I've gotten some from Amazon when I didn't have an upcoming trip and needed something, and that's fine. So I don't particularly run into a huge issue with things dying beforehand, before I can use them in the spices that I use every day. So that is I hope that answers somebody's question there, but that's what I have for you there. Okay, all right, so here's a gardening question. This person is struggling with garden soil amendments, fertilizing, when and how much, especially in raised beds. And I'm just gonna say that I am, I'm right there learning with you. I have not been gardening to this extent, well, since we moved into this house. So 3.5 years, I've had 8 large raised beds and a few other smaller versions of that. Before that, I was really container gardening, and by containers, I mean pots, for, 2-3 years before that when we were in Atlanta. So I do not have tremendous experience yet, and I am still very much a learn as you go type of gardener. I will say that this year, well, every year I've tried something different, right? Sometimes it's just, what do I have the bandwidth to do this year? This year I did have really great results. Is that because of how I amended my beds? I don't know. I don't know. But I will tell you what I added this year. And Will I do the same thing next year if the circumstances fit? Yeah, I mean, I had a good year. I can't necessarily say that the amendments I added were the reason why. However, what I did this past year was I did black cow, and these are in raised beds. I had a black cow, alfalfa pellets, coco coir, some biochar, and some vermiculite. And then I also fertilize about once a month. I mean, I would like to say I do it more often than that, but really about once a month with a good liquid fertilizer. I use an organic liquid fertilizer. I can put a link to that down below. And I just attach that to my hose and spray everything. And then I also, at the same time, I put down some granular vegetable fertilizer. And that's all I do. So as I said, I had a very productive garden last year. Is it because of the amendments I did and my fertilizing schedule? I don't know. I don't know. So any of you master gardeners down there who want to chime in on that question, please feel free. We can all learn. I can certainly learn. And hopefully this person will find your comments as well. All right, let's move on to, I think next we're going into, let's do the keto and more personal kind of questions. We'll start off with a personal question, and then we'll move to keto. And by personal, I don't mean, too personal to answer kind of thing, but just a question about me. And that is, I would like to know more about your background. Just curious what type of career you had. Did it involve food? And also, what made y'all decide to move to Tennessee? She says, my husband and I were born and raised in Texas. Lately, we've been discussing a move. Okay, there's a lot packed into that. So let's talk about, do my background and career first. I have a couple of degrees. My undergraduate degree is in marketing. My MBA is in finance. So I took that combination of those degrees into a couple of different areas. I was very engaged in politics for quite some time, and then moved on to the corporate side and did more government relations and marketing. And then when I got divorced, I needed a career that would allow me to still be a mom and still go to, the volleyball games, the soccer games, and do the sleepovers and whatever it is. So I got my real estate license, and then I ended up getting my broker's license and opened a company. And I did that for another 15 years or so before I retired. And that was, when did I retire? 2015, no, that's not right. 2017 maybe. Anyway, so that was that. And then here I am retired, working my tail off on YouTube. But that was my career. So nothing in food. Politics, I worked for a computer company back in the day. It was called Compaq. Then they got bought by HP. I worked for an oil and gas company at one point. I worked for a government contractor at one point. And as I said, I was in politics for a while. So I kind of took it all over the place, enjoyed the heck out of each and every one of those careers. And now I absolutely love what I'm doing. So all different, but all seem to just kind of fit with me pretty well at whatever the time was in my life. Like I said, the next part of her question was, what made y'all decide to move to Tennessee? I was born in Atlanta, but I have lived in Atlanta most of my life. I lived in DC for 10 years. I lived in Houston for 7 years, and then we went back to Atlanta. So all told, I think Atlanta was maybe 30 years or so. And I really saw Atlanta change. Atlanta was one of the best places I could ever imagine growing up. It was not too big. I mean, I remember as a kid watching the population change on the sign to 1 million as we waited for the next baby to be born at the hospital across the street. And now it's, I don't know, 6.5, 7 million. I don't even know what it is now. But it got to be too big for us. It got to be less, I hate to say less friendly, but it kind of did. Crime picked up. And I don't know, it just kind of lost its charm for us. And so when we retired, we wanted to find someplace else to live. And so we went all over the country. We're all up and down the East Coast, and we went out west. We went, we looked at everything. And although there were places that I liked and could have easily and happily lived, there were places that David liked and could easily and happily have lived. We didn't find one that suited both of us until we came here. And literally, we spent one night in this area where we are, and we both said, that's it. That's where we're going. And so from that point on, we went back and put our house in Atlanta on the market and started actively trying to find a house here. So that was it. Best move I ever made. Wish I had done it at least a decade sooner. I don't know. I love Tennessee. I feel like I don't know. I feel like I'm exactly where I should be. So that's my story on Tennessee. So if you're starting to feel like, maybe it's time for a change, maybe it is. And there may be some place out there that feels like a better fit for you at this particular time in your life. All right, let's see. Okay, I think that's it for that one. Let's get on to, I had a lot of questions about keto. I know not everybody is interested in keto, and keto is so popular these days that some of you are probably tired of hearing about keto, but I won't take up too much time with this, but I do want to answer some questions. Some of these are about canning and keto. And so let me just read a couple of these. This person says, I love canning, but I'd like to fill my shelves with keto-friendly foods. Can you suggest or show more keto-friendly canning ideas? I would love to hear more about your keto meals, what your carb intake in a day is. I was keto for over 6 years and my husband still is. Any meals that you could share would be great. This person says, anything keto or low carb is great. My husband and I are always looking for new and delicious things. This person says, I'm wondering if you could talk more about your keto diet, wondering if your blood work reflects improvement in cholesterol levels and other factors, how you actually feel. Okay, so let's try to talk first maybe my perspective on keto. I went from the standard American diet to paleo December 1st, 2015. And I know that because my mother was dying at the time. She was 72. She died a horrible death from cancer. My father had died previously at 71, a horrible death from Parkinson's disease. And somehow I knew that, I'm not going to say that what they were eating caused those diseases, but I do firmly believe in my soul that what they were eating was not making their body healthy enough to help ward off any of the cell changes or whatever that were happening in their body to cause these. So I do believe that, and they weren't, it's not like they were eating a bunch of junk food, but they were, they liked sugar. They liked sugar a lot. And so to me, I thought, my goodness, 71, I'm not going to be ready. I'm 61 now. The thought of dying by 71, I'm just not going to do that. So back in 2015, I thought paleo, let's do that. I felt great on paleo. It changed so many things for me because I was really going from the standard American diet. And not necessarily fast food, but more convenience foods than I can imagine doing at this point in my life. But anyway, so that made a huge, huge difference. And then keto started coming up, and it was 2017, I think, that I switched to keto. And again, I felt this just momentum health shift. I felt better, I looked better, I felt younger. The mind is really, really clear. You're thinking through I felt absolutely tremendous. So then in 2018, my husband had some health issues start. And so he joined me in keto, and I give tremendous tremendous credit to keto in helping him for so long. Keto was more difficult for him because it was so antithetical to the way he grew up. He just, I don't know, it felt like deprivation to him, whereas I really enjoy the keto foods. It doesn't mean I don't want sweet potatoes or, I don't know, whatever, rice. I love rice. I do love rice. But I do try to stay primarily away from those things. And so I had gotten off track and I was eating all that stuff, and I kind of blame it on the channel. Well, I have to do it because I have to do taste tests and I have to give people the recipes they want. And I don't know, it seemed pretty convenient, I guess. But I had gotten off track and I had put on weight. I was having, my joints were hurting again. My hip was hurting again. My skin was kind of gray. I'm like, oh, Carter, you've done this to yourself again. So I went back on keto this time. December 1st again. I think I have these revelations on December 1st because my birthday is December 5th. And it's always, okay, so before I start my next birthday, I need to kind of reevaluate and restart here. So December 1st of 2000, where are we now? We're in 24. So 2023, I went back to keto. So I've just passed another year of keto. And so my approach to keto is more lax at this point in my journey. I do not count my carbs. At this point, I do know kind of where I am during the day. I take the approach of an overall day. Where am I? Am I in ketosis? Am I not in ketosis? How long am I out of ketosis? Am I eating something that is going to keep me out of ketosis until tomorrow morning? That's the kind of thing that you'll just figure out as you go along. For years, the first couple of years I did this, I was blood testing every day to figure out what affected my body and what didn't, or how things affected me. So now I kind of look at a day, and if I'm going to eat carbs, like tomorrow night we're going to a friend's house and I'm bringing the vegetable, well, I'm taking something that sounds delicious and I know will be delicious to everyone. So it'll be roasted veggies and it'll be Brussels sprouts, which are just fine on keto. It'll be butternut squash, which is not generally included in keto, right? And then a couple of other things, some nuts and maybe even some cranberries. So not necessarily keto, but that just means to me in the way I eat that I won't be eating carbs until we get to that dinner. And then whatever I eat will again be moderate, right? I'm not going to sit down and eat a chocolate pie afterward or have a big piece of cake or, a giant scoop of mashed potatoes or something with it. So I am mindful of what I'm eating. I know when I'm eating carbs, and I am very mindful of how many I eat of how many of those I eat and what it's going to take for me to get back into ketosis. So that's kind of my approach is, my approach is different. There are people on the channel who are very, very strict right now and consider tomatoes not to be keto. Well, to me, as I just said, I don't necessarily look at a food and say it's keto or it's not keto, but does it fit anywhere in your diet throughout the day? That's kind of how I look at it. So if I put a couple of my, let's see, I made some notes on this here. A couple of my recipes, I put them into a chronometer and came up with some net carb counts. So the beef stew recipe that I did, I think it was in the first soup sampler, is 10 net carbs. The chipotle beef soup is 12 net carbs. The chipotle chicken soup was 12 net carbs. The beef ragu I did recently is 12 net carbs per serving. Beef Rogan Josh is 9 net carbs. The Lagerstrom chili without beans is 17 net carbs. It's all those pesky tomatoes and onions, I suppose. But I don't do things that are, just in my house, I just don't prepare meals that are 50 carbs, right? So when you look at the things I've done, you just have to decide what fits into your version of a keto diet. And there is no right version or wrong version. It's whatever suits your body and your lifestyle is where you should go with that. So if you were very, very strict, then I would simply be canning. It's hard to put a meal in a jar if you're very, very strict. You're going to be putting in meat and maybe some spices and maybe some broth. And then when you take it out, you can thicken it up with a keto thickener, or you can add a green vegetable on the side or something like that. So you just need to adjust to suit you. All right, let's see. A couple of other things. In there I was asked about my numbers, and I did answer this person when she asked the question. I did respond with my cholesterol numbers. So my cholesterol now, and I wish I had written down my answer to her inside of her question online, but my cholesterol, as I recall, is 150, 160, something like that. My triglycerides, I think, were 50 now, whereas in 2023 they'd been like 64, 65, something like that. So my cholesterol looks good. I'm not a huge personal believer that cholesterol is a bad thing. You need cholesterol to make hormones. But anyway, so I've seen no ill effects whatsoever in my lab tests. I used to keep very good track of them back in, from 2014 through 2021 or so. I kept very regular track of all of my labs, and my thyroid numbers have gotten significantly better through keto. My cholesterol numbers are really good through keto. My A1C is really, really good. Insulin level is good. Blood sugar is good. Inflammation number has gone down. I still fight some inflammation. Most of that is due to allergies, I think. But all in all, I have never felt so healthy in my life as when I am on keto. I feel significantly younger than my 61 years. I can move. I can stay up late. I sleep well. I don't know. I feel terrific. So if you're thinking about doing it and it's something that you think would suit you, I just have nothing but really good things to say about it. The one thing I will add is that this last time when I went to the doctor, my sodium was low, because with keto, you just don't hang on to excess water. So when the water goes out, it kind of takes the sodium with it. So I do have to make a concerted effort to get my electrolytes, particularly sodium, in my diet. So just keep an eye on your electrolytes if you're going to go keto, because you're not hanging on to water weight. It just goes out. And then one person asked me if I had ever done any diabetic recipes, and my answer is not specifically. I don't. There are no diabetics in my family. So, in my frame of reference, keto is an outstanding answer for diabetics, but I would never seek to advise a diabetic on diet, because I just don't know. It's just not my area of expertise. So I would say that many of the things that I do on here should fit into a diabetic diet, but you'll have to decide for yourself whether an individual recipe fits into how you try to help control your diabetes with diet. Okay. Let's see. I think we are getting toward the end. Oh, here's another organization question. This person says, loved your pantry tour. How do you keep record or inventory of all your canned goods? Do you keep track of each year separately, or is it a continuous list? And I really consider myself a spreadsheet nerd, and it's very embarrassing to have to say that I don't necessarily keep a detailed inventory of what's in the canning pantry or what's in my freezer. And because of that, I do sometimes lose track, particularly in the freezer. Now with my canning, I have everything on the shelves, and so it's very easy to, take a look and see, oh my gosh, I only have 3 Brunswick stews left. I better make sure that before I run out of those that I've made another batch, or I'm down to, 2 jars of crushed tomatoes. That's ridiculous. I need to get on that right now. So that to me is very easy to keep track of. I also organize those shelves by date, so all of the older stuff is on the very front row. And the newer stuff I load from the back because it's completely open back there for me to load from the back. So that really helps. That really helps. Once a year I do go through before the pantry tour video, and I do tally everything up. So I at least have an annual count of everything that I have in there. But I do not, if we eat a couple of jars of whatever Chipotle chicken soup for dinner, there's not some place where I go mark off 2 jars from that. I don't know. I'm sorry. That's more visual. I would like to give you a more organized answer to that, but that's what that is for me. And the freezer, well, you've seen my freezer, and yes, I lost track of some things, and I blame that on the lack of organization in there. So I am really hoping that, like the pantry downstairs, that the new organization of the freezer is going to help me manage that inventory significantly better and be able to know what I have in there. In Atlanta, I did not have a place to have all my jars in one place, so they were all over the house. Well, that was an organization nightmare. I mean, I had no idea what I had anywhere. I tried, and it was frustrating. And anyway, that was very difficult. So my organization method truly is organizing where they are and how they are kept, right? So I wish I could tell you that I had great spreadsheets to share, but unfortunately I don't. All right, we're getting down to the end here. I have a few talking about the future. So let's go ahead and talk about those things in the future of the channel. So I have one person who said, I really love cookbooks. Are you ever going to write a cookbook? Well, I never say never. I have learned that, so I'm not going to say never. So I will say maybe at some point. However, I will say that it is not a priority for me right now. What I really enjoy most is interacting with you and teaching, not so much sitting down and writing the cookbook and taking pictures at every single step along the way. That feels more like work to me than this feels like fun to me. So that's kind of where I am. There may be one at some point. It may be, I don't know, maybe I do it in a PDF version. Maybe I do something more than that. I'm not sure. But as of right now, I don't have any plans to write a cookbook. The next thing, let's see. Are you going to do a soup sampler number 3? Yes, I am. I had actually planned to do one this fall, and then my son set his wedding date for this fall, and I got all caught up in all the stuff I had to do for that. I was having so much fun that I did not have time to get that soup sampler put together for you. So that will be on my 2025 agenda. And then I have another person who says, will you ever please do live streams or Zoom calls? And so my answer is yes, I think so. However, I would like to do that maybe in a membership community, which is one of the things I've been talking to YouTube about. And I think I'm going to bring out in 2025, as I just mentioned when we were talking about the cookbook, I like the interaction. I like the interaction that we have in the comments or in email, because that's really all we can have at this point without the ability to do lives or Zooms or whatever. But I want that to be real interaction, with people that I get to know, not just somebody who happened to tune in and I love those people. We need those new people. However, I want it to be, if we're going to do a Zoom or a live stream or whatever, I want it to be you and me, right? So I want to be able to really answer your questions. I want to really be able to get to know you, and I just can't do that with we've grown a lot. There are a lot of people out there, and I love that, and I'm grateful, ever so grateful for that. But it doesn't create the intimate kind of relationship that I would like to have if I'm going to do live streams and Zooms. So that was a long-winded answer to yes, I will do those. Probably we'll put them into a membership probably early in 2025. I'm kind of working on that now. There's a course I'm taking to kind of figure out how to implement that. So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to leave me comments down below. So will it be live streams or Zooms? I don't know. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. With live streams, it kind of self-records, and then members could come back and watch it even if they couldn't be there for the live stream. Whereas a Zoom call, it doesn't necessarily self-record. I don't really, technology is not my strong suit. But anyway, I do know that the advantage for me in a Zoom call is that I could see you talking to me. It's not I get to do all the talking and then you have to do the typing and then I read it and then I can respond. In a Zoom call, we can actually have a real-time conversation. So I think that it'll probably start with live streams, and then at some point I may add the ability to do Zoom calls if you guys seem to want that as much as I do once we get into the membership and sort of figure this out. So those are my thoughts. I am wide open to your thoughts on any of that. In fact, what I'd like to do within the membership also is to have a great deal of feedback from where you want the channel to go, because where I want it to go may not be where you want it to go. And to the extent that it still fits with me, I want it to go where you want it to go, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this. And without your feedback, it's hard for me to know that. So I would like for the membership folks to be very engaged in driving the direction of the channel and helping me understand better what helps you. All right, so that's really it for the questions. I wanted to give you a quick update on the next couple of weeks and into a couple of months. So we are mid-December as I'm filming this and as it is posting. And all of my kids are coming for Christmas. My son will come with his brand new wife. My daughter will come with her wonderful fella who we adore. And my head is just so focused on having my kids under my roof that makes me cry. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, they will all be here. And right now what I want to be doing is preparing for them to be here. I want this to be it'll be the first time the 6 of us have all been together for a holiday at my house. And that is right now my priority. I know that you understand that. YouTube does not get that at all. And so, if I take a couple of weeks off from posting videos, which is what I'm planning, YouTube will not be happy and you may have to come find me again in January, but I will be back in January. And I'm looking forward to the Pantry Challenge. I have something very different, I think, planned for the Pantry Challenge because of things that are going on in our lives and what suits us at the time. But I think that what I'm going to do will be more useful to you than maybe what I've done in the typical Pantry Challenge before. So I'm very excited about that, and I'll fill you in on that in early January when I come back. But I am going to take a couple of weeks off from posting, and I wish you the very best of holidays. Merry Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful time with friends and family and loved ones. If you have grandkids, I'm so ready for grandkids. I just hope that you enjoy every single second of that. So I wish you a very Merry Christmas. I love you all. I'm going to go have a wonderful time with my family, and I will see you in the new year. Bye-bye.